Okay, I'll start anyway. Good evening. I trust you had a fruitful day. I do not say happy, though I hope it has been happy. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. So I thought this evening we'd tackle this rather long discourse. It's called the Discourse on Voidness. So this is just another way of saying not self, shunya. Sunya in Pali, in the Mahayana, it's sunyata, shunya. And remember that they extended the idea of not self, non-substantiality to everything. That's why they prefer the word sunya, emptiness, to the word anatta, not self. Anyway, this is about sunya. So these concepts, everything that the Mahayana talks about, you'll find the seed of many of their concepts right here in the Theravada. That's what my teacher told me, and I agree with him. So the Buddha's up in his own country now. He's back at Kapilavatthu, which is where, of course, the big mound is. His burial mound is up there. There were 8 of them, as far as I remember, but the one that everybody visits, of course, is at Kapilavatthu, or Kapilavastu, it's called now, I think. So he's at Kalakemaka, the Sakyans' dwelling, and he goes there, and then he makes his way to that place, and there's a lots of monks there, you see, and he asks from there. He goes to see Venerable Ananda, who's at Gata, and that's another dwelling of it's the dwelling place of a man called Gata, and he asks him, are a lot of monks there? And the Venerable Sir, many resting places have been prepared, and many bhikkhus are living there, making robes. This is the time for making robes, so that would be during the Vasa season. Now, Ananda, so now what the Buddha thinks is lots of people, lots of visitors is not good for the spiritual life. A bhikkhu, so now we can talk about just a meditator, does not shine by delighting in company, by taking delight in company, by devoting himself to delight in company, by delighting in society, and so on, by rejoicing in society. It is not possible that he will attain at will, without trouble and difficulty, the bliss of renunciation, the bliss of seclusion, the bliss of peace, and the bliss of enlightenment. It can be expected that someone who lives alone, withdrawn from society, will have little trouble or difficulty. So then the Buddha says much the same thing. And somebody who withdraws from society and either abides in the deliverance of the mind, that is temporary and delectable. So those are the jhanas, those are these higher absorptions, or the perpetual and unshakable deliverance, which of course is the full liberation. So it can be expected that when somebody lives alone, withdrawn from society, that he will achieve this, you see. Now, you have to take this into context. So as lay people, the less that you are engaged in, useless talk, useless TV viewing, useless talk on WhatsApp and all that, and withdraw into your own silence and find a secluded place, and of course make any communication or entertainment meaningful, then of course you are following the Buddha's advice here. So he goes on to say, I do not any kind of form. Whenever you see the word form in the translation here, it basically means whatever you're looking at. From change and alteration, I do not see a single kind of anything that you can see from the change and alteration of which there would not arise sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair in one who lusts after it and takes delight in it. So again, we're back to this distinction between enjoying something and becoming attached to it, becoming dependent on it for a particular mental state, or finding something pleasurable in order to run away from what is unpleasurable. So when you don't feel, when you feel a bit bored, then you might turn the TV on and so on. So that would be the wrong intention. So again, it's somebody who wants to not to get involved in useless talks and etc. Now, when the Tathagata, so now he doesn't want to be criticized because he himself is often surrounded by a retinue of his order, plus kings or king's ministers, other sectarians and their disciples, might come, and he's surrounded by all these people. So his other people will say, well, what about you? You see, he says, well, when I'm talking to them, I invariably, well, it's he because he's talking about himself as the Tathagata. He invariably talks to them in a way concerned with dismissing them. That's a rather harsh way of putting it. In other words, keeping to the point of the discussion or whatever they want to know, so that they leave. So there's no talking for talking's sake. So then, of course, abandoned like that, it's much easier to get concentration. And if you are pretty good at getting the jhanas, then you'll know that it does help to keep the mind, generally speaking, throughout the day calm. So now he gives attention to voidness internally. So again, this voidness, this emptiness, this non-substantiality in everything that we experience internally. So these, of course, are the 5 aggregates. So it's the body itself and all its sensations and feelings, feeling pleasant and unpleasant, feelings pleasant and unpleasant, the perceptions, concepts, all that sort of stuff, all the mental stuff, all the heart mental stuff, all the dreams, fantasies, the thinking, etc. And of course, consciousness. So when he turns with that view of seeking that, of seeing the emptiness of things, the lack of solidity, the insubstantiality, this is also a path to liberation. And in the same way, he would do it in the jhana states if you are an adept. And also you do it to other people too. You see it in other people. You're aware that just as this is true for you, so it is for every other living being, actually. Okay. And then, of course, if you are an adept at jhana, when you come out, you do have good, strong concentration, and you can turn that towards seeing the 3 characteristics. And this brings about a certain confidence and a steadiness and an ability to stay on the path as you want it. And then finally, you see, we take it into action. While I am walking thus, no evil, unwholesome states of covetousness and grief will beset me. So covetousness and grief is just another way of saying greed and hatred or aversion. And in this way, he has full awareness of that. And so he does with the standing, the walking, the sitting. There's no unwholesome states will beset me because of this inner imperturbability. That's how it's translated. In other words, the ability to keep the mind pure and clean. And of course, he will. Such a person will avoid such low talk, vulgar, coarse, and ignoble and unbeneficial leads, which does not lead to disenchantment, dispassion, cessation, peace, direct knowledge, and enlightenment and nibbana. So now we've been through this list before. It's the talk of kings, so government, robbers, ministers, armies, dangers, battles, food, drink, clothing, beds, garlands, perfumes, relatives, vehicles, villages, towns, cities, countries, women. This is men, women. So if you're a woman, it's man. Heroes, street wells, the dead, trivialities, the origin of the world, the origin of the sea, whether things are so or are not so. So now, all these subjects, of course, we do talk about, and there's a way of talking about them where they are not ignoble, vulgar, coarse, and unbeneficial. And it's up to us to decide when we're talking about these things in a beneficial way. Such thoughts of ill will. So then it's much the same thing. And then he goes on to the five, and then having done this, the five aggregates, there's the five chords of sensual desire. So that's your five senses, the outer senses, hearing, etc. And should constantly review his mind. Does any mental excitement concerning these five chords of sensual pleasure ever arise in me on any occasion? Okay, so we have to be that alert, that sort of moment-to-moment awareness to catch that relationship we have with the pleasures that the five senses give us. And when he can say to himself that no mental pleasure, no mental excitement concerning the five chords of sensual pleasure arise in me on that occasion, such a person has arrived at the non-returner. That's what the commentaries say. In other words, at the third stage of sanctity, of nobility, as they would put it, desire and lust for the five sense pleasures are abandoned in me. Okay, so all the earlier practice was generating insight into the way things are, the three characteristics of existence, how we create suffering, dukkha, desire, impermanence, and not self. And here it's beginning to culminate in a letting go, a disenchantment with the world of desire. And remember, whenever we talk about this, whenever we talk like that, don't forget that the Buddha, after his liberation, continued to eat, enjoy the forests, etc. And now there's the five aggregates affected by clinging. So now we go back to the five aggregates. So here's the Buddha describing a way to become liberated. We go back to the five aggregates, but this time to investigate their not self, their emptiness. Such is material form, such is arising, and such is disappearance. Such is feeling, such is arising and disappearance. Perception, its arising and disappearance. Formation, mental formation, dream fantasies, such their arising, their disappearance, and consciousness, such its arising and disappearance. And while he abides contemplating the rise and fall of these five aggregates affected by clinging, the conceit, I am, based on these five aggregates affected by clinging, is abandoned in him. And that's when a person becomes fully liberated. So just very quickly, the Buddha has delineated a path to liberation by seeing things that the voidness of things, the emptiness of things, the lack of some substantiality of things, but also one can see this as the awareness is empty of all those things. So there's a dual meaning there. So now the conversation changes, and it becomes, the question is, what does a good disciple see that, what good does a disciple see that he should seek the teacher's company if he is told to go away? So in other words, why do you want to stay around a teacher? And then he says, well, Ananda, he's talking again to Ananda, a disciple should not seek a teacher's company for the sake of discourses and standards and expositions. Then he praises Ananda. You've remembered all these teachings, you can recite them verbally, you've examined them with your mind. But such talk deals with, but instead of that, we should be talking about effacement, as favors the mind's release, which leads to complete disenchantment. So So what should be talked about is wanting little, on contentment, seclusion, aloofness from society, arousing energy, virtue, concentration, wisdom, and deliverance. Okay, so that's what we should be talking about when we are with our teachers. Then he talks about how a teacher or a disciple falls off the path. So a teacher, for instance, may be living secluded, etc., in a ravine, a hillside, or whatever. But the Brahmins and householders from the town and country visit him, and as a result, he goes astray, becomes filled with desire, succumbs to craving, and reverts to luxury. This teacher is said to be undone by a teacher's undoing. So there's always that danger of being lured back to the sensual life. And then the similar thing happens to a pupil. So they go find a place which is secluded, but because of all these visitors, they get drawn into the sensual life, the householder life. So remember, you have to translate this as a layperson. Obviously, you can't go to a forest or the foot of a tree and all that, but it's to do with attitude. It's to do with not being drawn into the delicious delights of the sensual world, but just enjoying it. So there's always that real difficulty for us to distinguish between enjoying something and becoming dependent on it for happiness. And the word here that he uses is excitement. See, whenever you feel that over-excitement, you know something's wrong. Now, when the Tathagata, the Buddha, appears in the world, although he may live secluded, etc., and he may be visited by all these people, of course, he does not go astray. He does not fall and revert back to luxury. But if a pupil does that under the teachings of a Buddha, then this is bad news, because with other teachers, lesser teachers, there is a loss, of course. The pupil loses out on where that teacher could take them. If you happen to be the pupil of a Buddha, he can take you all the way. And to fall by the way under a Buddha's dispensation, while the Buddha's there, is certainly bad news. So then he says, the final sentence is, I shall not treat you as a potter treats the raw, damp clay. Repeatedly restraining you, I shall speak to you, Ananda. Repeatedly admonishing you. Admonishing here, advising, I shall speak to you, Ananda. The sound core will stand the test. Now, were it not for the commentary, I don't think anybody can understand that. So the commentary says, the contrast in this simile is between the way the potter treats raw, damp clay and the way he treats the baked pots produced by the clay, from the clay. Now, the commentary says, after advising once, I shall not be silenced. So this is talking on the part of the Buddha. I shall advise and instruct by repeatedly admonishing you. Just as a potter tests the baked pots, puts aside those that are cracked, split or faulty, and keeps only those that pass the test, so I shall advise and instruct by repeatedly testing you, Ananda. Those among you who are sound, having reached the paths and fruit, will stand the test. And the commentary adds that mundane virtuous qualities are also intended in the criterion of soundness. So the Buddha here is saying that his job as a teacher is to keep guiding his student not only towards full liberation, but also towards the purity of the heart. And I'm reminded of Ajahn Chah, who said his job was to watch his pupils walking, and when they went off a bit to the left, he'd say a bit more to the right, and when they went off to the right, he'd say a bit more to the left. So our teachers are there to sort of guide us and keep us on that straight and narrow. So that's quite a long discourse on voidness. Remember that voidness, shunya, is just another way of saying anatta, not self. I can only hope these words have been of some assistance, that they've not been too confusing. I hope not. And that by your endeavor to purify the heart and maintain this right mindfulness, you will be liberated from all suffering sooner rather than later. Good. I'm glad most of you got back on there. I don't know what went wrong with the with that first YouTube.